Hi class, today we're going to be talking about Shakespearean sonnets to help prepare ourselves for our study of Shakespeare's play Macbeth. Now, Shakespeare can be a little bit intimidating because of his language. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to start by exploring some of Shakespeare's shorter poems in order to really familiarize ourselves with the way in which he writes. So we're going to be looking at sonnets, and sonnets are a very distinct type of poetry. He often actually uses sonnets within the larger picture of his big plays. So when we're talking about a sonnet, what we're talking about is a lyrical poem of 14 lines. And what makes this poem a lyric poem is the fact that it has a very distinct rhythm and rhyme scheme. In the case of Shakespearean sonnets, he's usually going to be writing in a rhythm that's called Ambach Pentameter, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So what makes a Shakespearean sonnet different than another sonnet? Well, there are all different types of sonnets, and what they have in common is the fact that they're lyrical in 14 lines, but the way in which they're structured can be different. The reason why we call Shakespearean sonnets is because he was such a prolific writer of this form that literary critics kind of decided that this was his type of sonnet. There are also two other types of sonnets, and they're both named after other sonnet writers who used different formats, but Shakespearean is the most common sonnet that you'll see. So when we're talking about a Shakespearean sonnet, it's actually important to think about the way in which it is structured and set up. And so we're going to be looking at its breakdown. So when we have that Shakespearean sonnet, we are going to have 3 quatrains. Now, a quatrain is a type of stanza, and that stanza has 4 lines of verse. When we're talking about poetry, a stanza is a breakdown of lines kind of similar to what a paragraph would be in prose writing. It's a way for us to kind of look at a poem by bits and pieces that are interconnected. So quatrain, quatra, cat, quattro, that means 4. So we have 4 lines of verse. So those 3 quatrains brings us to 12 out of the 14 lines. So we have 2 more lines to account for, and those 2 lines are called a couplet. And a couplet is going to be 2 lines of verse, and that makes sense, couple, couplet. So all of these lines are going to be organized not only by that breakdown of quatrain and couplet, but also by the rhyme scheme. So when we take a look at rhyme scheme, we're going to see that the first quatrain is going to be an A-B-A-B rhyme scheme. When we take a look at the second quatrain, we're going to see a C-D-C-D rhyme scheme. In the third, we'll see E-F-E-F, and then we're going to finally end with that G-G. So when we take a look at these poems in particular that we're going to be studying for, paying special attention to the type of rhyme scheme is going to be important. Now, the rhyme scheme kind of serves to break down the quatrains and the couplet, but it also helps to kind of break down what the poem is all about. So when we're looking at a poem, we are going to see that the poem itself is going to have that very distinct structure. So the first quatrain is going to introduce the topic of the sonnet. And that makes a lot of sense. We always want to start off introducing our topic when we're writing even an essay. So Shakespeare does this even in his poetry. The second quatrain is going to expand on the topic, so we're going to get a little bit deeper into this idea that he's exploring through his writing. The third quatrain is where we have a change. This change, also known as a turning point, is going to be called a volta. So this term, volta, it's a new literary term for you, and volta means change in Italian. So this is where we're going to be looking for something different. And the poem then ends with the couplet, and the couplet is going to do the nice little concluding of the sonnet. So you'll see here we have kind of this cohesive unit. We have an intro, we've got a body, and then we've got a conclusion. So the poem structure is very logical in that way. We're also going to take a look at a couple more terms to help us understand this whole breakdown. So going down here, we're going to take a look at scansion, meter, iambic pentameter, and foot. And this is the stuff that gets a little bit more complicated. So I know it's hard to listen to a bunch of definitions, but these definitions are really going to help you to be able to better understand the poetry as we are moving forward. So it's definitely important to stay focused. So when we're talking about the idea of scansion, scansion is a term that we use to describe the way in which we are breaking down the meter, aka the rhythm of poetry. And I'm going to show you guys how to do this step by step. When I talk about the word meter, it is also known as rhythm, but basically we're looking for a pattern of syllables, and those syllables are going to be either accented or unaccented, and that's going to give the poem its rhythmic quality. And we know rhythm is very important in a sonnet because it's a lyric poem, and lyric poems have that musical quality. Now, Shakespeare was a huge fan of one particular type of rhythm. He loved what we call iambic pentameter. And so iambic pentameter is a type of rhythm that really kind of captures the reader's attention. And the way that it does it is very interesting. So in a line of iambic pentameter, we are always going to have 10 syllables. So when you read through the line and you break down the syllables, you'll realize that there's 99.9% of the time always 10. Every once in a while, Shakespeare will add one or miss one, but we give it to him because it's really hard to write a whole beautiful poem in a very distinct rhythmic quality. So these 10 syllables aren't just 10 syllables randomly thrown in there. They actually have a rhythmic pattern. And in this idea, every second syllable is accented. So when we're talking about the scansion of something, we are actually going to be talking about its rhythmic pattern. So take a look here. I'm going to give you some symbols that you can use. We're going to use a little U, and that U is going to represent unaccented symbols. And then we're going to use kind of a little dash mark, and that's going to be accented symbols. The more and more we practice this, the easier it's going to be. And once we really look at it, I think that it will make a lot more sense. But again, having the foundation of a definition can be very beneficial. So these 10 syllables are broken down into what we call a foot. And a foot is a rhythmic unit into which a line of verse is divided. So feet have combinations of stressed and unstressed syllables. And so the idea is that we're kind of looking for this pattern. In Shakespeare's language, he likes to use the iambic pattern. And iambic is in which every second syllable is accented. So we've got a U and an I. Now, pentameter. Pentameter has to do with the amount of syllables. So we know that there's going to be 10 syllables, and if we have an unaccented, accented pattern, that breaks the syllables down into feet of 2 syllables. So pent means 5. So we have 5 pairs, which we also know as feet of syllables. So this is what we're going to be really practicing when we look at the scansion of a poem. We're going to be getting into the specific details, and those specific details are going to really help us to better understand Shakespeare's works. At this point, we're done with the definition part of your lesson. So I'm going to ask you to close out this screen and open up our second video. Our second video is a practice video. I'm going to be showing you how to mark things like the quatrains and the couplet, the rhyme scheme and the scansion, and then also how to break down our understanding of the poem itself. And I think this is really going to help you guys to be able to do this on your own. The third part of this is going to be your own individual practice, and you'll be able to use your surface prose just like I've been, and you'll be able to kind of mark your handout with the rhythm, the rhyme scheme, etc. So please open up video 2, and I'll see you shortly.